Depending on who you ask, progress in transport is either on the verge of a major revolution or slowly grinding to a halt. For some, innovation is at breakneck speed, from electric and autonomous cars to futuristic travel tech. Fast hops across cities in a flying taxi, 3D underground tunnels for rapid commutes, Hyperloop for near supersonic travel between cities, or even going from Los Angeles to Tokyo in half an hour by rocket. These are just some of the transport technologies slated for the next decade. For others, however, the reality couldn't appear more different. Progress in transport isn't accelerating, it's grinding to a halt, pointing out that we've travelled in more or less the same way for over a century. Cars, trains and planes are over 100 years old and still function in pretty much the same way. Electric cars are great, but they're also nearly as old as the car itself. All the dreams of futuristic transport methods aren't new. Designs for vacuum trains, rocket transport and flying cars have been around since the inception of their parent technologies, and they always seem to be a decade or so away. How can these contradictory views be simultaneously popular? Are we heading towards stagnation or revolution? Can we resolve the transport innovation paradox? In the video, Is Innovation Slowing Down?, we saw that transport is often cited as a primary example of slowing innovation. Yet hype for future transport seems to be at an all-time high. There's a belief that this time, things are different. This revolution is real. But wait, London to Dubai in 30 minutes? Intercity at Mach 1? Aren't we getting a bit carried away here? Will these things ever materialize? Before assessing the viability of these technologies in future series, it's important to understand the paradox and how it applies to innovation in general. Some critics lament the technologies as science fiction, yet startups and corporations are investing serious money, running into the billions, and they're backed by some of the richest people on Earth. Why pour money into tech that doesn't work? Are they clueless? Is it a publicity stunt? Or have they seen something others have missed? If massive change is underway, shouldn't it be obvious to everyone? To resolve the transport innovation paradox, first, we must understand some of the key drivers of technological progress by answering these questions. Can massive change go unnoticed? Can gradual progress lead to sudden transformation? How can seemingly unconnected fields start a revolution? Think about these questions. There's a hidden concept which connects them, which I will reveal later. You may be familiar with some of these concepts, but as we'll see, when we put them together, the results are surprising. Let's begin. Would you notice one of the breakthroughs of the century if it happened in plain sight? Perhaps you've seen this famous experiment. You're asked to count the number of passes made by the white players. While counting, a gorilla walks directly across the screen. Subjects are warned about this prior to watching, and nearly all participants report seeing it. They're then asked if they would have noticed the gorilla without prior warning. 90% of people believe they would, claiming it's obvious and clearly visible. Yet when tested without a warning, half the subjects actually fail to see it. Once we know about the gorilla, we find it difficult to believe that we could have possibly missed it. Yet in reality, many people do. There are two effects at play. Selective attention is when the brain focuses intently on few tasks, filtering everything else. This isn't just for visual processing, it's fundamental to how we process information. Hindsight bias is our tendency to believe an outcome was obvious after the event has happened, aka the knew it all along effect. We tend to selectively recall information that supports correct prediction, while conveniently forgetting the reasons that supported a different prediction. This can be so powerful. People often make an incorrect prediction, yet after the outcome, recall having made the correct prediction and believe the outcome was obvious all along. These effects explain our tendency to miss vital information for correct predictions. and why we believe outcomes were always obvious, even after predicting incorrectly. When forecasting future technologies, we must account for these biases. Previous technologies didn't necessarily unfold as predictably as we recall, and won't in the future either. Key information for future progress may be in our sights, yet we haven't noticed. It's now accepted that cars will become electric, and the public is beginning to accept the future role of autonomous cars. But acknowledging this takes time. Just 10 years ago, the majority of people thought electric cars were decades away or would never replace the combustion engine. The technology and infrastructure barriers were just too much, never mind autonomous vehicles. So back to the question, would you notice one of the breakthroughs of the century happening in plain sight? If I said car safety was one of those breakthroughs, would it surprise you? Is it even in your top 10? In the US in 2011, 32,000 people died in car crashes. Considering the miles driven, that's not many. Crashes aren't even a top 10 cause of death in the US. A century ago, fatalities per mile were 22 times higher. For perspective, at today's mileage, driving would kill 800,000 people per year, making it the #1 killer, worse than heart disease or cancer. And that's not even considering today's traffic and vehicle speeds. This past century, our primary transport has transformed from death trap to relatively safe, and we barely noticed. Now, this isn't a realistic hypothetical. If safety hadn't improved, speed limits would be much lower and far fewer people would drive. The car became one of the breakthroughs of the century because of the safety revolution. But it's often taken for granted due to the slow rate of progress. If all those safety innovations happened overnight, and suddenly lives were being saved by the thousands, it would be hailed an incredible breakthrough. Yet because it's gradual, our selective attention filters it out. It's tempting to say, of course cars are getting safer, because technology gets better. But recall, revolutions are obvious in hindsight. It was once thought that cars couldn't be made much safer. That was the job of the driver. The idea of getting anywhere near current safety levels was totally implausible. There's a profound implication here. Massive progress can often go largely unnoticed, something I'll call a silent revolution. And remember, this is just one example. How many more silent revolutions are underway right now? Can gradual progress cause rapid transformation, seemingly overnight? If you slowly cool water, little happens until you reach 0 degrees. Then it freezes and everything changes. This is known as a phase transition. But do we see them in technology? It's sometimes lamented that we managed to land on the moon half a century ago and haven't gone further since, leading some to suggest that progress in space is stagnant. Yet launching to space is getting cheaper. In 1981, space shuttle launches to orbit cost $85,000 per kilo. By 2017, SpaceX's Falcon 9 reduced this to less than $1,900 per kilo, 45 times cheaper. Not to mention new rockets, which slash costs further. As costs tumble, space access has crossed a threshold. Space is no longer the reserve of large governments. Space is profitable. Since 1962, around 100 satellites per year were launched globally. In 2013, however, things started to change. More satellites launched in the past 3 years than the previous decade, and the rate is accelerating dramatically. In May, SpaceX launched 60 satellites in a single launch. They aim to provide cheap global internet and require thousands more launched over the next few years. And that's just SpaceX. OneWeb and Amazon have similar plans. Space is far from stagnant. Since launch costs cross the threshold, we've seen exponential growth, and it's not limited to satellites. From space tourism to commercial travel, space is changing forever. So yes, gradual progress can cause rapid transformation. The concept of thresholds is critical to understanding abrupt change, something I'll call a sudden transformation. Recall the silent revolutions we mentioned before? What happens if those silent revolutions lead to sudden transformations? Massive change appearing almost from nowhere, though of course, obvious in hindsight. The more silent revolutions, the more sudden transformations. These ideas alone are big, but the third key driver changes everything. Can unrelated fields combine together to change the world? Can you think of any examples? Let me know in the comments down below. You've probably got one in your pocket. Maybe you're watching this video on one. Smartphones are an example of convergence, the merger of many technological breakthroughs. While it's called a phone, it's also a computer, a camera, and hundreds of other things simultaneously. It's the result of innovation in many different fields. Networks, LED, battery, the list goes on. But is there convergence in transport? It may not be obvious, but fundamental aspects of transport are changing. While companies like Uber and Lyft may look like glorified taxi services, it's not that simple. Uber is an example of the sharing economy, and this model marks a shift from transport as a product, the car, to transport as a service, the app. Long term, it will drastically reduce transport costs, and car manufacturers are paying attention. But for now, we're interested in how Uber became possible. Historically, if you ask people how a transport revolution could happen, answers would likely be new materials or propulsion methods, things that make vehicles faster or cheaper. But Uber is an example of what I'll call SUPRISE convergence, seemingly unrelated technologies combining to disrupt status quo. No propulsion breakthrough, but computer chips, mobile phones, and the internet. Normally, cars spend 95% of their lifetime parked. Uber dramatically increases vehicle utilization, delivering much higher cost efficiency, whilst connecting customers to vehicles at costs taxis can't compete with. While savings are restricted to short distances and infrequent journeys, it's just the beginning. Convergence of electric and autonomous technologies will greatly amplify ride-sharing, permanently disrupting traditional car ownership. More car sharing means fewer cars sold, but each vehicle gets used more. Uber's success may seem obvious now, but imagine saying 20 years ago that mobile phones would completely disrupt the automotive industry. Well, that change has begun. Car companies are starting to call themselves mobility companies. The change seems subtle, but the reasons are significant. They recognize that the automotive landscape is changing. It's not just electric and autonomous. The concept of car ownership and even the car itself is being undermined. Car companies are well aware that getting from A to B is about to change forever. Let's put it all together. Earlier, we heard how cars and space are claimed as examples of stagnation in transport. Given what we've just seen, is that really the case? I also referenced a hidden concept connecting the key drivers of silent revolutions, sudden transformations, and surprise convergence. What's the connection? It is that each of these is extremely difficult to anticipate. Silent revolutions can let innovations slip by unnoticed. Sudden transformations cause seemingly spontaneous progress, and surprise convergence can trigger breakthroughs from fields we never imagined. Even if we're diligent, we can't see all progress, anticipate every threshold, nor track every field that could somehow affect transport. With all that complexity, it's no surprise we underestimate future innovation, and how difficult it makes predicting the viability of future technologies. Predicting requires considerable work and is only obvious in hindsight. This understanding finally allows us to answer the transport innovation paradox. There is no paradox, because transport innovation isn't stagnating, far from it. Rather than examples of slowdown, cars and space show consistent innovation, and progress appears to be accelerating. The reason for the discrepancy in opinions has everything to do with perception. Innovation can be hard to see and easy to undervalue. It quietly moves forward, but we're only likely to notice if it's delivered as a big breakthrough. But how big are these effects when we combine them together? Let's return to Uber. How do the key drivers apply to their future projects? Let's take SUPRISE convergence even further. If we add autonomous and drone technologies, we get Uber Elevate, their air taxi service planned for 2023. This seemed a pipe dream just a few years ago, but multiple silent revolutions have quietly changed that. Improvements in battery, motors, and control systems are putting us on the verge of a sudden transformation. Air taxis' range, cost, and performance are close to reaching a critical threshold where the market becomes big enough to be profitable, after which the economics of air taxis changes forever. This is why countless air taxis are in development globally. Despite the perception it's a sci-fi dream decades away, Uber Elevate is going from crazy idea to huge opportunity in a shockingly short time frame, and this may be just the tip of the iceberg. These key drivers are real, but they only explain why a technological revolution can be much closer than we realize, not proof of a specific future technology's viability. Will any of the future transport methods succeed? There's far more we need to understand before we can answer that. Upcoming series will delve into future transport tech with similar concepts and in-depth analysis. We'll find out if they can really live up to the hype. To be notified, click the subscribe button and the bell icon. YouTube is unlikely to notify you if you just subscribed. So will we travel from city to city faster than ever? Are the days of slow, painful commutes over? Is getting from A to B about to change forever? Let's find out.